This is the Goode Show. My name's Surinder and I'm a military spouse. I've been a military spouse for over 26 years and my guy served 30 years as a Navy SEAL and retired as a Command Master Chief. Now, I've heard a few stories and I've told a few stories and now I am sharing stories. Sit back, relax, grab a beer, grab a coffee and enjoy. Check us out on social media at The Goode Show. Welcome to this week's episode. My name's Surinder, I am your host, and this is The Goode Show. Now, if you've been watching the teasers, you know that I'm at the Brain Treatment Center here with my good friend, Dr. Erik Won. Dr. Erik Won, thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
This is a very important month. June is Men's Health Month, so we really want to get into the service that you provide for our service members and their spouses. Now, I'd like you to explain this neuro-wave science. Wave neuro, I keep getting it around. Don't I? Is it wave neuro?
Yes, so it's wave neuroscience.
Okay.
And the technology we're moving forward is called magnetic EEG guided resonance therapy.
Oh, wow,
it's a
that's
mouthful.
a mouthful.
So MeRT is sort of the short name for it. It's
Okay.
a personalized form of brain stimulation, or what we call neuromodulation. And functionally, it's 3 steps. The first step is to get what's called an EEG, or electroencephalogram. Much in the same way an electrocardiogram is an electrophysiologic picture of the heart, we get these electrophysiologic pictures of the brain.
Okay.
And we look for disruptions in activity, which is the second step. We do some computational analytics, and we have a lab that interrogates these EEGs and looks for disruptions in activity and designs protocols that will be unique to you and what we see in the brain image. And then we deliver a treatment through an FDA-approved tool called transcranial magnetic stimulation that'll provide gentle pulses of stimulation to targeted areas of the brain and restore function. And then we do that cycle about every week, every 2 weeks, we get a new EEG. And through that process, we see restoration of function and improvement in symptoms.
Okay, so this sounds amazing. You can actually see on paper, what the brain is at the moment and where the damaged areas are. Is damage the right word?
We talk about disruptions in connectivity.
Okay.
And what's a little bit different about EEG is taking over a time domain. So
Okay.
whereas CT scans and MRIs are like still shots, one moment in time, we will get these EEGs over 10, 15, 30 minutes. And we can see how areas of the brain are communicating with each other. And those disruptions in activity can manifest as behavioral symptoms if we see significant disruption. And specific to military operators, we've had operators who worked in explosive ordnance disposal, or even people who are blowing up IEDs or thermobaric grenades. The repeated overpressurization blast injuries will frequently cause some disruption in activity. That visualization is actually, I think, a pretty important part of the healing journey, because many times they've been told things look pretty good. Maybe it's all in your head. And being able to see the functional image changes the discussion just a little bit, because it gives them a goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
I completely agree as well with when you can actually see something, then you can see if change is being made in it as well. It's because I know, of service members that have said, listen, I know that there's something not right, or that I feel different, and they've been told, no, everything looks good, blood work looks good, it's in your head.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance. Science sometimes takes a while to catch up to the state of the art, but it's not unusual to see these images and these changes, and to partner with the clients and patients who come in to try to restore function. And that process can take some time, but speaking for many of the Marines that I deployed with, it was a bit of a revelation. Because up to this point, they might have thought, gosh, I'm weak, or I don't have the willpower to overcome this, and to be able to see that there was an actual neurobiological change that was causing them to feel that way was quite illuminating and empowering. Because now many of them will endorse better behaviors. They'll eat cleaner, they'll exercise more regularly, they'll protect their sleep. And then if we can add our treatment on top of that, many times we see them really flourish.
Now, you were in the military.
Yes.
We just spoke about this about 10 minutes ago, and you were in the Navy?
Yeah.
Okay, flight doctor.
Yeah, so I was a flight surgeon.
Flight surgeon.
I deployed with the Marines.
Okay.
So my squadron was HMM 268. We deployed as the 11th Marine Expeditionary Group.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we had some of the first casualties of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So my mission functionally changed quite dramatically from, really something we were focused on force readiness and being combat ready to how do I help these men and women that are grieving and struggling. And when I left the service, finished up my medical training at two of the Harvard hospitals, Mass General and Brigham and Women's, and was at the Boeing company initially as a staff physician, became chief physician, and then moved into a different role as their chief technology officer. And that's how I interfaced with this technology. And the service never really leaves you, so I was always looking for something that could help the men and women I knew that were struggling. And this was one of the first things I found that could move the needle in a clinically meaningful way.
Yeah.
And so there was about 2 or 3 years of diligence where I was looking at this and thinking, this could really change the way we practice a lot of medicine. Yeah. And there's a little bit of a dance of would I join the company, would I not? And ultimately I was very happy where I was, but there was a Navy SEAL Master Chief who kind of challenged me, and he had success with the treatment. He put his finger in my chest and said, what do you stand for, brother? Are you going to stay at this comfortable job, or are you going to do something that can really help humanity and change, bring this technology to vulnerable communities around the world? And that really resonated with me. So I jumped on board, it's 8 or 9 years ago, and it's just been a full sprint ever since.
I want to go back to your military career. How long did you serve?
They give me credit for 8 years. It was 4 years of medical school, 4 years of service, 1 deployment. But I still look back at those as really some of the best years of my life.
Yeah. What made you go the Navy route?
So I took a health profession scholarship. They helped to pay for medical school. But it was also something, my parents they immigrated from Korea with kind of on academic scholarships. And so growing up, I was always taught to have great reverence for the opportunity and the freedom that we had in the U.S. And so when I heard about this opportunity, I couldn't say no. And so it's something that was very exciting for me. I feel very privileged to have been able to serve in that capacity.
Oh, well, thank you for your service.
Of course, thank you for yours.
Oh, thank you. Now, when we look at service members, when you just look at a human being, what do they need to take into consideration? What signs, symptoms that they know themselves, okay, I'm not just blue, that maybe I need some help. What should they be, and what should their partner be looking out for as well, where they're going to need some help?
It's a great question. And I think the most important thing is to trust yourself. Nobody knows you better than you. And even when you go to a doctor or a psychologist, we're trying to obtain information. But if you know there's been a change and that you're not feeling well, that's real.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't need to take a questionnaire or a survey to know. And then you need to become your own best advocate. And, spouses will sometimes team up to seek the best care possible.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think when you're going through life and you know that you're not right for whatever reason, kind of explore that. And there's many different things. Everyone's a little bit different. Typically, there'll be a course of blood work. There may be some imaging. And this is a new capability that I think is important for the community to know about. Yeah. It's not for everyone. Yeah. But I think it's an important innovation in terms of having a new tool that can help people who have brain injuries, brain disruption, and a variety of different mental health conditions. We're seeing some promising data. How
do you get guys through the door? That's my question, because again, I've met plenty of service members, I'm sure we both have, where maybe they're too proud. You know, there's some stigma, kind of like, you know, how do you get rid of that, of going to ask for help, just to ask for help, and then walking through your door? How do you get them to that point?
I think one of the most important things we've observed is service member to service member, that communication, there's implicit trust.
Yes.
And when somebody goes to another service member says, hey, this worked for me, they tend to listen in a different way.
Yes.
It's different, you know, it's different when you hear it from a third party. There may be some barriers of skepticism, but when it's somebody that you trust and somebody that you've been on deployment with and you've been in the trenches with, you tend to trust those people. So I would say the most common referral base we get is from veterans who have benefited from the treatment. They go and talk to others, and that's kind of taken on a life of its own. The second piece of that, I think, is, especially for the active duty community, I think there are concerns about, will this affect my clearance? You know, will this impact my career? And largely, I hope that there is a recognition by leadership that it's okay for people to ask for help. But we're also seeing a lot of use cases for this technology in terms of human performance and optimization. And so I can't always disclose like units, but there are some special operations commands who've used the technology. I guess I can mention, because there's a publication on it, but there's an Air Force Special Operations unit that used our technology as the first brain optimization program. And we saw very significant changes in a number of scores, whether, you know, it's reaction times or cognitive processing speed and even depression scores. And so the saying is, you don't have to be sick to want to be well. And we want to deploy this as something where if people do feel not at their best, you don't have to be like at rock bottom. But we want this to be accessible to people. And part of that, I think, is just being informed and to know what are the benefits, what are the risks, and everyone can make, you know, an educated decision for themselves.
What are the risks? Are there any risks?
There are, you know, every technology, every pharmaceutical, they've always got risks and side effects. The most common one in this case is a transient headache, usually alleviated by over-the-counter ibuprofen or Tylenol. Usually just the first couple of treatments, and then you adapt to it, and you typically do not have these headaches, you know, on a long-term basis. There can be scalp irritation at the point of stimulation. The most serious side effect to talk about is a risk of seizure. And so the manufacturer of the device typically lists a risk of seizure in the neighborhood of 1 in 100,000. To put a benchmark around that, the Nintendo Game Boys and Nintendo Switches, these handheld games, game systems, those usually list a risk of seizure about 1 in 5,000 due to the flickering of the screen. And so it's very safe from that perspective. But nevertheless, we have to be fully transparent and honest about what the risks are. Usually only a concern if somebody has had a history of seizures or epilepsy. Even then, we can implement some safety protocols. But those are some of the biggest risks and side effects.
Now, you mentioned earlier on, and I just want clarification on this. This is available to active duty members also?
Yes.
Spouses, now, I've read some information that you've got that this treatment, and this is fantastic, because like I said earlier, in the 26 and a half years that I've been a military spouse, is the first time that I've heard, well, no, you're covered. If you've got TRICARE, you're covered too. Which is fantastic, Dr. Won.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, we were talking earlier that this is a bit, in my opinion, my experience, this may be a bit of a silent epidemic. Where, you know, one of the first special operations folks that came in, they had a dramatic improvement, and when they went back home, the spouse said, well, what about me? Right? Like, I'm glad he got better, but I feel broken too. And so at that time, we just treated them for free. And so we felt like the right thing to do to make the family whole was to take care of the spouse as well. And hearing from her, she felt hesitant to raise her hand because she wasn't the one, you know, out in the field, you know, deployed and doing kind of military work. But there is undoubtedly a lot of challenges. You know, having a loved one overseas, and I've heard, you know, even for aviators who are overseas, every time a black car rolls up on the street and you hear two doors slam, you always wonder, is that my husband? And there's a certain amount of anxiety that comes along with it, but just there's some inherent challenges that are overlooked. And our experience has been through TRICARE and other insurances, we see a lot of spouses and children, almost as often, maybe more often than we see military service members.
Again, as a military spouse, yes, I can definitely tell you that I think what we tend to do is we obviously don't want to have an argument with our partner while they're leaving. They've now gone on deployment, so they've kind of like, it's the argument is done and dusted for them because they've moved on to something else. Whereas, sometimes sometimes for me, the argument was never resolved. It's open, and now he's on deployment. Now he's coming back. I don't want to bring up the same argument. That was 6 months ago, so you have a tendency of just suppressing it.
Yeah.
And then it's just a wash, rinse, repeat cycle after that. And I didn't realize either until after my husband retired that, yes, I hate to use the word broken. I don't think I'm broken, but I was broken. There's situations you go through, the emotional roller coaster. And I have to give a shout out just now to my good friend Angie DeJarnette, who has put together the STEPS Foundation for Naval Special Warfare Spouses post, separation, because she herself felt a little broken and thought, hey, well, what is there for me? And I think this is something that really needs to go Navy-wide, military-wide really, because to your point, and you hit the nail on the head, you want to make the family whole, and I tell people all the time, the transition is not just for the service member, it is a family transition that affects children. Because even my kid turned around to me one day and went, Mom, it's really weird, Dad's picking me up from school every day. And I thought, oh yeah, I guess so. So how would spouses, obviously they would go to primary care, physician, they get in, whatever they have to say to get in, to come in and see you. Now, once they're in here, talk to us about what actually happens. You had mentioned that it's electromagnetic stimulation, and you might have a itchy scalp. So what's on your scalp to make it itchy, or what could it be?
Yeah, well, so first I think it's brilliant, and I love that there's a nonprofit dedicated to that cause. I think that's wonderful. For the experience, when somebody comes in, the first step is to get an EEG, and they just sit in a dark room. You have to stay awake, but they put what looks like a bicycle helmet on your head, and you have to sit there for 10 to 15 minutes, and we capture this brain image. Within 24 hours, usually, you'll have a review with a doctor or a physician assistant, and they will share that image with you and have a conversation about what they're seeing.
Okay.
If everything looks great, then that's a happy conversation. If they see something that could be fine-tuned, then we have that conversation as well. The treatment itself is just sitting in a comfortable chair, and they do place a coil in an area, usually the middle of the forehead, what we call the mid-forebrain, and you'll feel some gentle pulses. It doesn't hurt, and it's been described to me as it feels like a hummingbird tapping your forehead.
Okay.
So the scalp irritation is just if that coil is placed too forcefully. So it's usually not going to be an issue, but we do have some patients who enjoy the sensation and they'll actually pull it. And so we just suggest them, don't do that. You just have to be in the area. But it's a 1.8 Tesla MRI grade coil, but instead of creating a 3D image, it's engineered to deliver a pulse of energy. The reason the magnet threw me off at first, I was very skeptical when I first heard about this, but the first order principles of physics that are being engaged, there's something called the Biot-Savart principle, where magnets can deliver energy across a solid barrier.
Okay.
So because we have this 1 centimeter piece of skull that encases our brain, this can deliver gentle pulses of energy that traverse the skull and cause an action potential to trigger within the neurons in the cortex. And functionally what we're doing is we're just training those neurons to fire at a rate that synchronizes with global brain function.
Okay.
So if you have neurons that are dormant and firing too slow, we can very, with some level of precision, encourage them to fire faster.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
You can actually, it seems to me that you've centered in on one part of the brain or wherever the activity is taking place, and that's where your focus is. It's not just the whole head, it's just you've pinpointed where these neurons need to maybe reconnect.
That's right. We pride ourselves on being a precision guided treatment.
Yeah.
So the first thing is this is a non-pharmaceutical approach.
Yes, I love that too.
Yeah. So you don't have the normal side effect profile of liver damage and kidney damage. We can be precision guided in terms of where the treatment is going, and it's pretty mild. We talked about the side effects. Comparatively, it's pretty benign. But importantly, we don't have to overpower the brain with too much energy. This is not just to put the audience's mind at ease. This is nothing like electroconvulsive therapy. It's not high wattage, high energy. It's very mild, gentle, pulsing sensation. But over time, we can entrain the brain so much in the same way, you go to the gym, you work out, the repetitions allow the muscles to grow back. We're healing organisms, right? And so if you put two ends of a wound margin together, it'll heal. If you put two ends of a broken bone together, it'll heal, sometimes grow back stronger. And what we're doing is, in cases where the brain may be misfiring just a little bit, we're giving it the friendly reminder that this is the rate you want to fire at. And our natural biology does the heavy lifting for us. So our philosophy is, you don't need to hammer neurons with too much energy. You just give it a low dose of energy, and then it starts to entrain itself.
The way you've just explained it is the first time it's been explained to me when I actually understand it. It is a very simple concept, going to what you were talking about, the gym. If I needed to build my bicep, I would have to do my bicep curls, and then my bicep gets strong. So I guess if you apply that to your brain, it now makes, perfect sense to me that's how it would work. Tell us about some of your success stories, people that have come in, and how long, that is another question people will want to ask. How long does this treatment take? Does it depend upon the PTSD, the trauma, the depth, individual?
Yeah. Every case is individual. Most of our research has been on 4 weeks of treatment. But there are some people who take 2 weeks of treatment and they do just fine. There's some people with more severe injury that may take longer, so they may go to 6 weeks. But in terms of case illustrations, I would share one of the first cases I sent in was a Marine Corps buddy. He was a crew chief. And I'd heard from other friends that he was struggling, and he agreed to go in. It was actually the first case that I observed. And it was kind of stunning to see the change, to the point where if he wasn't my friend, I may not have believed that this was possible. But he agreed to come in. We took his EEG over a weekend. We started him on Monday. And within 2 weeks, he had shaven, cleaned himself up. And the data point to me that was most meaningful was his wife coming in and saying, "That's the man I married 10 years ago. You gave my husband back." And so it just conjured all these memories of this is why we go into medicine. Because you're used to incremental change. Somebody's blood pressure improves by 10 points or cholesterol changes by 20 points. You get excited. But to see somebody go from really a desperate place in their mental health to being back alive and vibrant again.
Oh my gosh,
Because I think about where that family went, because what if he had taken his own life? He's got 2 boys, and I see him coaching his kids' football team now. And so that pivot point where the family becomes whole again, that's why we're so passionate about what we're doing, because these are the kind of changes. Not everyone's going to be quite that significant, but we're encouraged by seeing those changes.
But I think the other important thing here is that I think one of the most important things to me is that it's non-invasive. There's no medication, pharmaceutical medication involved. And 4 weeks, 2 weeks, to see such a change in a human, I think that's It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think what's exciting at this moment in time, not just with our organization, but I would say neuroscience and medicine in general, is I don't think there's been a time in history where there was greater reason for optimism.
Yes.
That we can make meaningful changes in people's lives and their cognitive function and their mental health, not necessarily requiring indefinite consumption of drugs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if we can get to the root cause, fix the circuitry, we can see some of these changes. And I think the next 10 years with some of the other interventions that are being researched, whether it's psychedelics or some upcoming versions of talk therapy, these combinations of managing symptoms and in some cases getting to root cause issues, I think we're going to see some really meaningful change.
Yeah.
Probably in a way that we haven't seen preceding this.
When people come in here for this treatment, it's not just that they're just going to do the treatment. They have to do other things as well, like eating healthy, trying to go work out. It's not like this is the treatment and now you're fixed. You've got to...
Absolutely. Yeah, we try to, every time a patient comes in, we spend some time coaching them on fundamental principles like honoring our circadian rhythm and our biology, getting blue light in the morning. And I don't want to misrepresent anything. It's not like you get the treatment and it's all rainbows and unicorns and everything is great. It's just the beginning of the healing journey. And so we've heard repeatedly that once I got my cognitive function back and I could think more clearly and I started sleeping better, the real work began. And so they go back to marriage counseling. Many times they'll get financial counseling and try to restore some of the issues that maybe had fallen off in the past.
Yeah.
But what we've heard frequently, unsolicited feedback from cognitive behavioral therapists and psychologists is they have a fighting chance at success now. Because for the first time, they can listen without getting angry.
Yes.
And they can give two-way feedback that may be something new in some relationships. And so that's what inspires us and gives us hope. But it does take work. So the circadian rhythm, protecting your sleep is very important. We can go deep on sleep hygiene if we want to. Nutrition, as you know, is critical. And so making sure people are putting good fuel into their body, clean diet, clean nutrients. And then exercise, of course. In the military, I think most people are pretty physically fit. Not always, but that tends to be something that people enjoy very quickly. They just have to find the sport or the athletic endeavor that they really love.
Now, how can commands, spouses, how can we support our service members better? How can commands support service members better, do you think?
I think there's a culture shift that's happening. And I think just being open-minded and creating an open culture where people can raise their hand, take a knee if they need to, and come in for help, come in for treatment without fear of repercussion or that this will be a career ender. Those should not even be considerations. Depression, post-traumatic stress are sort of natural epiphenomena of being in a combat environment. There's some people who are insulated to it and they never experience these symptoms. That's awesome. But for others, may just need a little break. And I think from our perspective, this treatment can be a part of normal hygiene where, as there's a dip, or if we see an EEG where there's some disruption of function, I'd rather fix it early than have them fall off a cliff.
Oh, definitely.
So we are talking to different groups about perhaps incorporating the EEG as part of an annual physical or some other mechanism where we have a safety net where we can capture people. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to come in for treatment, but at least have a conversation of we're seeing something.
We'll be right back. Join us with Dr. Erik Won.
My name is Erik Won. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Wave Neuroscience, and really honored to be here on the Goode podcast. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Welcome back, everybody. Now listen, we were having this little conversation during the break. Again, it comes down to spouses corralling behind their service member or partner to get them through the door. But you had made a comment, Dr. Won, which really is spot on about the veteran,
Yeah, and so the conversation was, how do we get veterans or spouses, loved ones in if we see that they need the help? And my feedback was, many times the veteran has to be ready. Yeah. And it's a hard thing, especially when it's a loved one, when you see the need and there are resources out there. But ultimately, there will come a time when they are ready. But it's hard to force somebody or to push somebody.
I always think it's a little bit like asking your spouse to teach you to, I don't know, swim. Like in my instance, it was, I'm not a great swimmer. So while my husband was on deployment, I hired a swimming coach, and he came back and he looked at me and he went, "For crying out loud, lady, I'm a Navy SEAL, and he went and paid for a swim instructor." But I wouldn't have taken direction from him very well. Yeah. So I guess, and like I said to you as well, it's taken me a couple of years to finally get my guy through the door, just to make sure, hey, are you good? Because I think guys are guys, and they don't want to go and ask for help, and talk about shit like that, quite honestly.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys, especially from the NSW community, they're alphas, and there's a lot of pride. It's hard to ask for help, right? The one exception to the feedback I should highlight is, if somebody is really struggling, or they have thoughts of self-harm, that is something where I would not wait. Yes. And you can recruit, if there's other buddies in the military community who can rally around them and just take them by the shoulder and say, hey, we need you to do this, kind of do an intervention. Yeah. That is something that's important, because, we've got this, depending on what data you believe, 18 to 22 suicides a day, just an intolerable number for our country. And so I would encourage anyone who's in that situation to not hesitate and to intervene when you can. Absolutely.
Now, where can people learn more about the treatment, and how can people reach out to the Brain Treatment Center?
Yeah, so there's two websites. There's waveneuro.com, which is the parent technology company. And then there's braintreatmentcenter.com, which is the clinics. And so there's a regulatory principle called the corporate practice of medicine, where technology and the clinics have to be separated, so that the doctors are not conflicted by profit. They always have to do what's right for the patient. And so there's separate entities. All the clinics are privately owned by usually doctors. Some business people will partner with clinicians in the area, but those two websites are valuable resources. And then there's quite a bit of social media available through Facebook and Instagram. I don't think we're on TikTok. But
neither am I.
Yeah, but if people want information, there should be a good amount of information there.
Okay. Dr. Won, it has been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for what you do, because again, there is, I think it's less than 1% of our nation that sign on the dotted line and serve in the military, and it's a very, very important less than 1% that do. So I'm all about getting out information to our service members and their families, anything that can make their lives so much better, since they've made it easier for us. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Well, the pleasure was very much mine, and thank you for everything you do. I truly enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to come in to see Dr. Won because I do have a bit of an issue. I can't cross the Coronado Bridge for some reason. So when I come in to get my treatment, we're going to podcast that as well, so you guys can see it. It has been great having you listening on the show today. My name's Surinder. I've been your host. This is The Goode Show. Thanks for tuning in to The Goode Show. I hope you have been inspired by today's conversation. If you loved what you heard, help us spread the word. Follow me on Instagram @The Goode Show. As military spouses, we all have stories to share, experiences, resources, and support. I want to hear your story and highlight your business. Let's connect, DM me, or visit surindergoode.com to share your journey. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and keep doing good things.